Hey everybody, welcome to Guns and Gadgets. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for watching. This morning I hosted a roundtable discussion with two of our state representatives here in Massachusetts, Kevin Kuros and Joe McKenna. And I think what follows is extremely informative for those of us living in Massachusetts, as well as those living around the country whose eyes are on what's going on in Massachusetts as it pertains to our Attorney General's blatant overreach and the abuse of her powers. It is long. It was about a 54-minute session, and I hope that you take the time to watch it. A lot of good questions were brought up. A lot of things were explained in detail by the representatives. Some good information, so please check it out. I appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you. All right, guys, gals, thank you all for coming. I appreciate I didn't know we would have this big of a turnout anyway, so thank you for taking time out of your schedule. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jared Yanis, obviously a member of the club. I live here in Douglas, was a cop for 13 years, and even longer than that, I've been a strong proponent of the Second Amendment. You see a couple cameras here. I'm recording this for my YouTube channel. If you do not want your likeness, we're pretty much pointing up here anyway, but if you don't want yourself on the channel, let me know before we take off, and I'll make sure that your image is scrubbed. If you're interested in watching it or want to follow the channel, there's a lot of pro Second Amendment stuff. I have some cards there on the table. Help yourself, and it gives me an excuse to have my wife order some better ones. So thank you. And without any further ado, I will let our distinguished guests introduce themselves. And this is a roundtable. So a roundtable discussion is pretty informal. I hope everybody brought some questions. Don't feel intimidated to ask them. It's just a back and forth. These gentlemen taking time out of their schedule on a Saturday morning, and they're willing to answer whatever questions we have. So don't be shy. And with that,
hi, I'm Representative Kevin Kuros. I live in Uxbridge. I represent the towns of Uxbridge, Blackstone, Millville, and Bellingham. I'm wrapping up my third term, running unopposed for my fourth term, so must be doing something right. Prior to representing those towns, though, when I was initially elected to the legislature, I represented the town of Douglas, also Webster, Dudley, part of Oxford, and part of Uxbridge. And then with legislative redistricting, I ended up with my current district. Been a longtime supporter of the Second Amendment, although I was not a gun owner. I just didn't grow up in a sporting family, but feel that it's part and parcel to the fabric of who we are as a country, and very pleased to announce I picked up my LTC yesterday. So happy to be joining you guys and ladies and taking advantage of my Second Amendment rights. So pass it over to Joe.
I'm Joe McKenna. I'm the state rep here in Douglas. I live in Webster. Just wrapping up my first term and also unopposed, so feel pretty happy about that. Prior to being the rep, I was the chief of staff for the state rep out in Southbridge and Dudley for 3 years. And like Kevin, I mean, I've got my LTC. I got it just about as soon as I could. Always been a supporter of sportsmen and the Second Amendment. I think the first time I ever went hunting, I was about 4 years old with my dad, and I think we were just taking a walk through the woods, and he happened to be carrying a gun. But it was a pretty cool experience. So I've been around firearms, been around rifles, shotguns, handguns, and certainly support everyone's right to own and carry. So happy to be here.
all right. So we all know what our laws were before Maura Healey woke up one morning and reinterpreted a 13-year-old law in Massachusetts, a law that was on the books for 22 years somewhere in the country at any given time. So that's why I wanted to set this so that we, the people, can speak to our representatives and to see, what can or will be done and what avenues people can take. So with that, I'll throw the first question out. I'll throw the softball pitch. So it's pretty easy. When we were young, we learned the Constitution was had divided government into three branches: the legislative, executive, and the judiciary. Each has its own specific powers and ensures that no one branch has too much power. The Attorney General falls into the executive branch, yet she took it upon herself to reinterpret an 18-year-old law and changed what the Massachusetts assault weapon ban was overnight. Now, the only people who can interpret laws is the judiciary, and many believe the Attorney General's action was an overreach. Gentlemen, what do you think?
Agree 100%. The timing of what she did is crucial to understanding her incentives. She filed this enforcement directive, whatever you want to call it, with only about a week or two left in the legislative session. The legislature does not meet formally after July 31st. And the only things that get brought up by the legislature after that point are very, very non-controversial items. So she knew that by issuing this directive with only a week left in the legislature, we could take no effective action. We were as blindsided as everyone else in this room when she issued her directive one morning. You know, she didn't tell her supporters, she didn't tell her opponents, she didn't tell anybody. But did it knowing that the clock was running out on our legislative session so that she could basically say, you know, I'm going to pass this law. In my mind, that's the equivalent of me going on the Mass Pike and saying, I feel like driving 125 today. I can say that, but I don't really have the authority. So there's several lawsuits that have been filed, and we certainly agree that she's overstepping her bounds and are taking some steps. So
yeah, I'd just like to echo what Joe said. Absolutely, I think it was an overreach. Where I'll disagree with Joe is that she didn't talk to anybody about it. I think she did. If you saw the release that came out, she already had quotes from a number of elected officials. And so this was something that was carefully orchestrated and planned. And although inside the building we didn't catch wind of it until the day the announcement dropped, it clearly was orchestrated and planned, and I believe politically motivated, as Joe said.
Yeah. About the politics, I mean, the role of the Attorney General is supposed to be to enforce the laws, but she's trying to make it, and we've seen time and time again the actions of our Attorney General have been extremely politically motivated. I think it was about a week or two after she issued this directive, she flew down to the Democratic National Convention and starts talking on a national stage about, oh, look at all the good things I'm doing in Massachusetts to get guns off the street and things like that. So, I mean, she clearly was doing this to start this conversation nationally and to be a weather balloon as far as gun control on a national level. And, I think Kevin agrees, it's never good to be the first in anything, especially when it's something as pretty malicious as this. And so I think next week she's going down to the Orlando nightclub shooting. So now she's using a site of a tragedy for her own political gain to sell her agenda. So everything she's done has not been for enforcement of the law or carrying out the law. It's been for political agenda completely.
I mean, just to add to that point as well about her political motivations, if we all recall last year when the series of videos came out talking about Planned Parenthood and that they were selling baby parts theoretically, and she was very strongly, heavily supported by Planned Parenthood during her run for Attorney General. So one of our colleagues had actually asked her to investigate to see if the Massachusetts branches of Planned Parenthood were selling baby parts. She came back within 3 days, I believe it was, saying I've conducted an extensive investigation, and they're not doing it here in Massachusetts. Now, what have you ever seen happen in government in 3 days? Literally nothing, right? So again, a completely unrelated issue, but it speaks to, I think, the motivations of the Attorney General. I don't believe are 100% on board with just enforcing the law.
Anybody else have a question? Don't be shy.
Sure.
So one, thanks for coming by today.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
So for the folks in the room and for folks that may have, the firearms that she is right now has banned, what's what type of legal recourse does she have against us today? I know she said that she was not going to proceed with any type of legal action against folks who already own these types of firearms, but I don't trust her, and
Yeah, sure.
I just what can we do to basically protect our own selves?
Well, obviously, I think Joe and I agree. This is probably not going to be solved legislatively because I don't think there's enough will on Beacon Hill to take this on. It is going to have to take a lawsuit to settle this issue, and there's already have been a couple filed, and Joe could talk about some details on those in a few minutes. But if you recall, when she announced the directive, the language she used is, I understand that you believe that you purchased these guns legally over the past years.
I mean, that was their own law we had before.
Of course, right. And she said, I understand that you believe you purchased these guns legally.
Right.
Okay? isn't the state part of every transaction?
Right.
So if the state, was literally part of that purchase transaction, this is not a belief that we purchased these guns legally. It's an outright, positive proof. I mean, I don't know how there's any. I'm not an attorney, but I don't know how anybody can argue that otherwise in court that you didn't purchase these guns legally when the state was part of that transaction, had to grant not its implicit but its explicit approval for that purchase. So, long-winded answer, but I mean, it's going to take a court case to resolve this. And and if Joe, if you want to touch on the cases that have already been filed.
Just one thing. So in 1994,
Yep.
they told us what was legal to buy in the state.
Yes.
Yep.
That's what the state told us.
Right.
We abide by those laws. Now they tell us that it's not legal.
Yeah. The other funny thing she said is, in her statement is, well, we can't let industry make the laws on what's legal or not. Ironically, it's ATF, the federal government, who gave the directives to industry about what was legal or not. So now you've got ATF, the federal government, state and local governments, purchasers, sellers, retailers, distributors, manufacturers, sportsmen's clubs. They all understand the law. You've got one person who seems doesn't. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, as far as the lawsuits, NSSF, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, has an existing lawsuit that they've already filed. There's several gun owners who are plaintiffs in that. They're taking it on from a commerce perspective. They're taking it on from the perspective of the gun dealers who now have stocks of inventory that may or may not be legal. The NRA will file an additional lawsuit based on a consumer perspective and a civil rights perspective. So the NRA lawsuit is going to be one that more represents you as individuals in your purchases, as your rights to bear arms. I think it's important to note Smith & Wesson has donated, I don't have the figure, but a very $500,000, very large amount of money to support these lawsuits.
To the Legal Defense Fund, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so, like Kevin said, we could file whatever legislation we want. The reality is it's just not going to move on Beacon Hill. It's going to be a ruling through the judicial system that says this is or is not legal. The other thing to note, there's no enforcement agency outlined or detailed in her directive. Nowhere does she say it's going to be the state police, it's going to be the environmental police, it's going to be your local police that are going to go to the retailer or go to the home and say, well, that's an illegal firearm. She just said, oh, it's illegal, but I don't know who's going to enforce it. So the first person who comes up with the enforcement agency, that's a detail that remains to be seen. So how can you file a law without any sort of backing up to it?
Let me give you a real-world scenario that could easily occur. A friend of mine owns an AR-15, and one of the ones that was legally purchased, okay, because of the timing and everything else. And he says, "Here's a scenario. What if I'm just breaking down my AR-15, cleaning it? It's on my kitchen table, cleaning it, and something happens in my house." Okay, my little girl falls down the steps, or my wife gets ill, or something like that. I call 911. Well, in small towns, oftentimes paramedics will show up with a police officer, right? And we all live in small towns, So he says, now all of a sudden, I call for an emergency for someone in my home. That officer is in the untenable situation of having to make a decision on the spot whether I'm a felon or not, And so, it's not that far-fetched to see our law enforcement officers being put in very, very difficult scenarios in otherwise completely innocent situations. And so it's a real challenge that this presents. And I would not want to be a man in blue right now, because you've got some very, very difficult decisions to make, like that, like we always ask them to make. So it's going to make life very difficult.
Have a trigger lock on it.
Well, I had
Exactly.
a friend with his wife sprained his ankle, and they came in, and he had a gun above the fireplace, and they confiscated the gun because they didn't have a trigger lock.
Trigger
on it.
lock.
Wow.
Yeah.
The gun had never been fired for years and years. He didn't even know if it could be fired.
Yeah.
He took it.
Same scenario, piggyback. So you have your AR or even your AK broken down, and you lose a spring. I mean, how many of us have had a spring shoot off when you're breaking a gun down? You can't even find a supplier in the state who will order you a spring now, because it's a copycat part.
Yeah.
That's how screwed
Wow.
up it is in the state. And I'll throw some stats out for you. We know that in Massachusetts we have the defined assault weapons ban, okay? And prior to that, it was federal under the Clinton administration. And the 10 years during that assault weapon ban, there were 0 of 2 federal attorney generals or their staff found that the Massachusetts law violated anything. 0 of 2 ATF directors or their staff found no problems with the Massachusetts law or any weapons sold at that time. 0 of 136 state attorney generals or their staff found no problems, and that's nationwide. After the sunset in 2004, the federal ban, Massachusetts and 6 other states plus the District of Columbia made the assault weapon ban their own. They adopted it at the state level. And during that time, since that time, 0 of 18 state attorney generals or their staff found that these our purchases or sales violated anything, including 2 Massachusetts attorney generals.
Sure.
Also, you can add Maura Healey to that because she didn't start the job the day she reinterpreted this. So that's 22 years and over 158 state and federal law enforcement professionals never found a problem with Massachusetts until Maura Healey decided she wanted a federal job.
Well, and to that point, I mean, if this was something that needed to be done, I'm shocked that 8 years of Deval Patrick and Martha Coakley as anti-gun liberal governor and attorney general, with Maura Healey as a staffer for Attorney General Martha Coakley, by the way. Why, if this was such an important issue, why did they not take it up over 8 years of their governance? You know, so it just speaks to the political incentive behind it. Now that Maura's the top dog, she decides that she wants to use it for her gain.
And again, if you just take a look at the FBI crime stats for Massachusetts, the most recent data we have said that there were no long rifle deaths last year, and it might have been accidental deaths, you know, hunting, that kind of thing, or range accidents. But as far as actual murders, there were none committed. So this is a solution in search of a problem.
The only one is recently was the 2 cops that were shot, I believe in Chelsea or East Boston, by an assault weapon.
Right.
And the guy was employed by a government agency
Really?
Yeah.
who supposedly has been vetted.
I believe that was a shotgun too.
Was a shot. They said assault rifle.
Was assault
But the FBI crime data, I think, is as recent as 2014. I don't think we have 2015 yet. Right.
Yeah.
FBI is
People
always
can't
the
even vet their own people. How the hell are they going to
Sure.
vet?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
How close are any of these cases ready to go to court, these lawsuits?
I would say it's going to be a very long process because whoever wins the lawsuit, I can bet my car, everything I own that there's going to be an appeal filed. And then at the conclusion of that, this is going to, I would guess, just pure speculation, I would guess this goes to the Supreme Court because no one's going to be, whoever loses is not going to be satisfied.
Right.
This is going to go through every appeal process. This is a major, major deal. This is going to be multi-year.
So the easier way would be to vote her out and get somebody in there that would vote it right back to where it was before.
So,
Right.
To that
Unfortunately, I have
end-
2 more years to wait to do that, though.
yeah.
To that end, I've been dealing with Mike Bazinet, who's the national director on the PR side for NSSF, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, who filed the lawsuit. And he told me straight up it's going to be a long, long fight. They're still in the process of finalizing their stuff. To that end, if anybody's interested, Goal, who is the only full-time Second Amendment authority in the state, they are looking for people, for plaintiffs. Those of us who have an LTC and still want to buy ARs. Those of us who just recently got an LTC and you can't buy an AR now. They are looking for those of us, the common everyday person, to get on a stand and say, listen, they took away my right. You know, what are we going to do about it? So if you're interested, you can call Goal. Their information's everywhere.
Yeah, and we're very well connected with Jim Wallace, the executive director, with John Green, the education and legislative director. So, you know, if you need any help with Goal, they've been huge supporters of us. We're supporters of them, so we can help facilitate in any way.
Also, one more thing, for the lawsuit, it's going to be very expensive. I have a GoFundMe going, whether you want to help out or not, or spread it. Right on my YouTube page, there's a video for it. We've raised over $1,000 so far nationwide, and I've given $750 to Goal so far. I'm making a donation at the end of next week once I get my next withdrawal to Com2A. So there are people out there trying. But the big
Thanks
thing
for doing that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
problem.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But the big thing is though we, the taxpayer, are paying for all of these lawsuits, whether she's the plaintiff or the defendant. She launched suit against Glock. She launched suit against Remington because she thinks those are unsafe firearms and asked for all of their purchase and sale records, all their misfire or repair orders, not just from Massachusetts, but globally. She thinks she is like that powerful, she can do that. So we have to pay for that lawsuit. She's being sued by NSSF, the NRA. We have to pay for her defense. And these gentlemen can verify the state is looking at a multi-million-dollar deficit, and now we got to pay for all these lawsuits. So it's something to think about.
So yeah, but go,
Didn't
sir.
I just hear that somebody is introducing legislation to like straighten out the
or define her rights?
Yeah, to talk a little bit about the legislative process, I think that's an important question. Is the way our legislative sessions work is, we get sworn in January, and then we go essentially as a full-time legislature through August of the following year. So it's essentially about an 18-month session of formal sessions. Once we hit the end of August of an election year, we then move into informal sessions, and so almost nothing happens in informal sessions other than name a bridge after somebody, issue a sick leave bank for someone who's used all their sick leave, those types of things. Right. So it'll be January would be the earliest that anything actually would be actionable. So we get sworn in, the first week of January, and then we have a legislative filing deadline, which is roughly the third week of January, that we have to get all our legislation filed by. You can always file throughout the 2-year term. However, you're guaranteed a hearing on your bill if you do it during the early filing period. So it's important that anything that is going to be filed be done so in those first 3 weeks, because that way, even if political gamesmanship is going to be played, we're guaranteed by our rules that we adopt every year that our bills will get a hearing. And that's a fantastic opportunity for proponents to come in and talk about what this would do and what it means. So.
And I don't want to be a downer on it, but I want to be realistic with the timeline. So as Kevin mentioned, the filing deadline's the end of January. With the new session, there's going to be new committee chairs and new assignments. Once those bills are all filed, and there's about 6,000 to 7,000 bills filed between the House and the Senate, those all have to go to the clerk's offices. They get assigned to committees. So this would ostensibly go to a committee on public safety. That committee on public safety probably has between 300 to 700 bills. So those committees will be sorting those out. The brunt of the legislative agenda between April and July is the budget. So not very many things outside of the budget get taken up that are of significant weight. So realistically, a hearing on this bill or related bills would take place in the summer or fall.
At the earliest, probably, right?
Would take place next fall.
Now, and here's a good situation, though, where activism may come into play. If everybody starts blowing up their legislators, voicemails and emails with, hey, let's get this bill moving quickly, things do get moved along sometimes more quickly, and you guys don't need to blow up our emails and voicemail, we're already on it. But, talk to your friends and family members in other areas and say, as soon as, the clock starts running next term in January, they'll start pressuring your legislators to do something with this.
Yeah.
Something we did do as a legislature, because again, we have no constitutional authority over that branch of the government. It's a co-equal branch of government that she sits in, but we can exert, political pressure to some degree. So on July 23rd, this is the week of the enforcement, the week right after the enforcement initiative, the Republican. The House Republican leader and the Senate Republican leader, so the two minority leaders, co-authored a letter pretty strongly worded, asking her to kind of cease and desist on enforcement of this until we're able to kind of wade through all the legal aspects of it. And it was signed, I don't have the exact count here, but it was signed by a fair number.
Every Republican and then a handful of
Dems as well. But probably half dozen to a dozen Democrats and literally every member of the Republican caucus. That was filed on July 23rd. I recognize that because it was pretty strongly worded, that some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle may have been reluctant to sign it. Right. So several days later, about a week later, Representative John Fernandez from Milford, who's just retiring now, he also co-authored a letter, and his letter was almost from a legal perspective. It was...
And just as background, he's the chairman of Judiciary, so he is the chair of the Judiciary Committee, which deals with this whole quagmire of what's legal, what's not.
Right. And so Rep. Fernandez's letter did not take a position, did not ask for a repeal or anything like that, simply asked for a legal clarification. Question number one, what is the exact constitutional and or statutory basis that authorizes your action? Question two, the exact statutory provisions that you rely upon to deem the weapons described as copies or duplicates as being prohibited, et cetera, et cetera. So he was just looking for clarification to understand why you did this or under what authority you did this. That was dated July 28th. Sad to report that here we are on, what's the date right now, October 29th? And we've yet to receive even a courtesy of a response from our Attorney General when you've got probably over half the legislature writing to her from both the House and Senate. So not quite sure how long it takes to respond to a letter, but we're
remember,
months away now.
remember, she issued a ruling on Planned Parenthood in 3 days. Yet
Right.
here we are 5 months later. And furthermore, Goal issued a Freedom of Information Act to her office for some information on what led to her decision. And I don't know if you recall, but the legislature passed a new public records law which really beefed up the government's need and obligation to carry out Freedom of Information requests, and she hasn't responded to that yet. You know, you've got your chief law enforcement refusing Freedom of Information requests,
Just
which is
before Goal filed, there was a regular Joe Schmo, one of us, from town of Holden, who did the same thing. And while he requested all of the investigatory forms and all of her notes that led her to this decision that the law's been wrong for so long. And she didn't give him what she was asking for, but what she did give him was redacted ridiculously. So she's not even looking to follow the law for the Freedom of Information Act. So
I thought there was a conflict on an FOI.
Yep,
There is.
there is. So she's in direct violation.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. What's the recourse on that?
That's a good question.
I believe the new bill includes penalties.
Yeah. Yeah, she does. So, I mean, I think an important note on the lawsuits and everything is this goes so far beyond the Second Amendment. This goes to the core of the role of the constitutional offices, because today she's issuing a directive on the Second Amendment. Who knows what she or a subsequent Attorney General issues. So that's why the decisions through the lawsuits are going to be so monumental, because they're really speaking to the definition of the role of the Attorney General in Massachusetts. So it's going to have a huge impact beyond Second Amendment issues.